Fragment goal seems to be to ensure that the Time Weaver's prophecy does not get fulfilled, since it can get directly involved in a world without undoing it from it seems, like the fragment processing the Overseer tried to do. Possessing the Overseer tried to do, the fragment we spoke to is trying to guide people from this world to do its bidding. On the other hand, the fragment that tried to erase me back during Selkram's ritual was probably a different entity whose only purpose was to deal with anyone that tried to reveal the Magium's true nature while in the Magium's immediate vicinity. Oh, very specific, very specific. So only in the backyard that fragment is active, and when you go to Magium's backyard and while you link to it, you talk about its true nature, it gets pissed off. The fragment that we spoke to doesn't know that you were trying to reveal the Magium's nature then, Hardrick says. Considering that the fragment don't usually communicate with each other, the answer is probably no, Arka says, which means that the only reason why it tried to send us to the void was because it wanted to punish us for not making any effort to deal with the prophecy. This is already the third Magium fragment we have met that tried to end our existence in one way or another. Call me crazy here, but I'm starting to think that our individual lives don't have much value to them. The fragment said it itself, Darren says. A single sacrifice is sometimes required in order for many to be saved. In other words, as long as there are only a few of us dying, it doesn't give a damn. Yes, Araka says, and as long as the copy version of me from the past were to be found, the other fragments would not have cared if it destroyed a whole world in the process. Oh. As long as the copy version of me from the past were to be found. Right, she did send that specific fragment to look for the Araka in the past on a different world. It's pretty clear by this point that these fragments will mow down anyone standing in the way. It's kind of like robotic. It's kind of robotic in a way of standing in the way of their goals. So the best course of action is probably to avoid contact with them as much as possible. It looks like the meeting room the Meredith told us about is the one over there, Kate says, as she points towards the door at the end of the tunnel. Should we head in? I think that before entering the so what is the goal of the Magium itself then? Or does it not have a goal? Ooh, that's something interesting. Then here's the thing, like if let's say the Magium is at the center and Magium has bunch of fragments underneath it. Like look at Magium as CEO and the upper managers as like the fragments, right? If the CEO is the source of everything, but the CEO doesn't have a goal, because if it did, it would just snap its finger and do it, its hypothetical finger and do it, then that clearly means that the fragments are instilled personalities, or not personalities, but goals, for some reason. Like why do fragments have goals? And why did it get fragmented in the first place? I don't think we have heard anything about why the split between the three dimensions even happened. Why did the primordial plane break away into three different things? Kate says as she points towards the door at the end of the tunnel. Should we head in? I think that before entering the meeting room, we should decide if we want to tell Meredith about what the Magium said to us or not. Darren says in a low voice. You mean about him heavily implying that you should kill Aiden? Merindra says. You're not seriously considered doing that, are you? He's going to destroy you. Right now we're only discussing whether we should mention this detail to Meredith or not, Darren says. Once we hear her side of the story, we might be able to make a more informed decision, but maybe it would be better to let her bring up the subject on her own. What do you guys think? We should probably avoid it. I mean, we have told her a lot, but this specific thing is abrupt. And she clearly doesn't understand what the Magium is, because she was not pulled into the realm of the Magium, and she thought that it was like, oh, you are so honored, you are so like blessed because you were able to interact with the Magium. So clearly doesn't understand the structure of the Magium, so we probably shouldn't be revealing its nature in any capacity. So we should probably avoid mentioning any of this to Meredith for now. We should probably avoid mentioning anything of this to Meredith for now, I say. If we were to bring up the subject by ourselves, it might give off the wrong impression that we have already accepted the Magium's fragment request. I'd rather hear what she has to say about it first. A fair point, Darren says. Does anyone else have anything to add, or should we go with Barry's idea? It's all the same to me, since I'm not planning to be a part of this manhunt either way, Hardrick says. That's fine, Kate says. Flower also nods. Then it's settled, Darren says. Let's go see what Meredith wants. Darren goes to open the door, and then we all enter the meeting room one by one. The inside of the room is not too different from the hall where we used to meet with the King of Underground back in the Allender, except for the fact that there are many Rasethi decorations on the wall depicting their much beloved crest of the hawk holding the sun in his talons. Isn't that a slightly Access Power E motif? Well, I've seen that in India as well sometimes. I'm not sure what it's supposed to signify, but I've definitely seen it somewhere. Like, not on the internet, like IRL as well. On the internet, I've definitely seen that. There's a table in the middle of the room and enough chairs on our side for all of us to sit in. On the other side of the table, there are only 2 chairs in which Meredith and Diane are already seated. As soon as we enter, Meredith invites us to sit in the chairs, so we do as she asks, get ourselves seated comfortably on the opposite side of her. Once you're all at the table, Meredith begins to speak. You must be wondering why I called you here, Meredith says. I will answer all of your questions very soon, but first I would like to ask a question, please. Please understand that you are by no means obligated to give me an answer, and I apologize if I'm being too direct. But is there any chance that you could tell me what you discussed with our creator after you were summoned in his realm? My friends and I exchange a look, and after a moment of silence, Darren is the one who answers Meredith. We'd rather not discuss that for now, if you don't mind, he says. Of course, Meredith says. This is completely understandable. There is no need to rush things. If you do feel like talking about it later, let me know. We will, Darren says. Before we take this discussion any further, I would like to ask just one question, I say. Feel free, Meredith says. Ask anything you want. Anything I want, I say, while raising an eyebrow. Alright then. In that case, could you tell me if you are the one who's been buying up all the stat devices from the other continent shortly before the beginning of the Mage tournament? For a few seconds, there is only silence where Meredith and I just keep looking directly at each other without averting our eyes. What made you arrive at that conclusion? Meredith asked me simply without showing any change in her facial expression. Well, for starters, I say, whoever pulled off the stunt must have been someone with a lot of money. Who knew that stat boosters were more than fortune tellers' trinkets, and who needed to get hold of all those devices before the tournament began? I can't think of many people who would fit that description. I then paused for several moments to see if the expression on Meredith's face changes in any way, but she is able to control herself perfectly. Is that it? Meredith says. Are these the only reason that led you to believe that I was the one who amassed all those devices? No, I say. There's also the fact that my stat booster has been harnessing considerably less energy in Thelius and Allender than outside of the 2 cities. Aside from this, I know of another person with a stat device who's been Thelius since the beginning of the tournament, who has gathered far fewer stat points than me because of that. If there are some other... Right, that would make sense because Layla was inside the city. We came from outside, so we amassed a lot of points, but she didn't amass as much because she was constantly in the city. And that would only mean there's a bunch of stat devices in the city, and that's dividing up the points. If there were some other harnessers of magical energies in those cities, like for example, let's say 1,000 stat devices, then it would make a lot of sense. What exactly are you implying? Meredith asked me. Do I really need to spell it out? I say. What I'm implying is that this whole tournament is a sham. You never planned to give anyone access to the Magium. The only reason why you even considered offering it as a prize was because you knew for certain that this was the only thing that could possibly lure so many mages to a single place. The real purpose of this tournament was never to choose a champion to defend Varathia. It was to use all those stat devices that you bought to extract a huge amount of energy from the participants. Oh, now I get it, Hardrick says. That's why they made us wait for 1 week before giving us our first objective. It was also why they made us run around the whole continent like idiots looking for pine cones. They were stalling for time so they could get enough energy out of this. Exactly, I say. Honestly, the only thing I can figure out for the life of me is why they would even allow the mages to kill each other at all. Why not just make a rule stating that no killing is permitted before the tournament begins, then delay us indefinitely? That is what we tried initially, Meredith says calmly while we all turn to look at her. That is also the reason why most of the energy extractors have been placed below the major cities of Varathia. It's because we expected the majority of the tournament participants to seek shelter inside the cities while they wait for the first objectives to be announced. We even went as far as sabotaging the telepathic devices meant to relay those objectives to them just to be sure that we'd have as much time as possible. Unfortunately, the King of Varathia disagreed with us. They said that enforcing a rule preventing tournament participants from killing each other would each other would be against the tradition of Arathia and that they wouldn't accept it. To top it all off, they only informed us of this very shortly before the beginning of the contest. You could even begin to imagine just how much this affected our plans.